Hi, I'm Todd. I wanted to make this short video to talk to you about basic and expert Dungeons and Dragons, but specifically the basic set, which you can see behind me, which was the first rule set that I played for when I got into D&D way back in the day. And it's sort of become the document of the old school revival or old school renaissance or whatever you want to use for OSR. Sort of games, being that it's a very clear and concise system, and it ended up being the basis for lots of different retro clones and riffs on the old rules. So it's sort of seen its own revival in the last few years. But it's a great game just by itself, and I think sometimes it seems intimidating until you actually look at it. So I wanted to make this little video to kind of give an overview of how it works and maybe a little bit of why it's special, and certainly why it shouldn't scare anyone, and hopefully encourage people out there to go and maybe give it a look and play it on its own terms, as it's newly available, or not newly, but it's available now digitally on PDF. So it's something that you don't have to rely on a clone anymore to go play. You can go read the rules and play it yourself. So with that said, let's take a look. So here's my sort of beat up version of the basic rules. I got it off of eBay for cheap. It's kind of coming apart in places, but since I have another version that's in the box that you saw earlier, I can afford to have one that is fraying at the edges. I'm going to switch just to the book so we can maybe take a better look. So opening up the book, it's hard to tell, but the book itself, I'm just going to bend it here so you can see. It's thin. Let's see, there's the expert rules underneath. It's a very thin book. And once you take out spells and monsters, it's even thinner. But you can see it's got everything you need. And here, I'll try to shove this so you can see it. And that's basically all you need for a character sheet, if that. You could probably squeeze your average character into an index card. Maybe both sides if you're a magic user and you have enough spells, or you have a lot of equipment, or both. But that's it. Now, the big things about this edition, or basically about D&D in general, is this was one of the first versions, I guess maybe the second one, or third if you're including AD&D. I don't want to get too caught up in the history because it's kind of labyrinthine and it's sort of beyond the scope of what I'm trying to do. But this was really one of the first attempts to gear an explanation of how the rules worked to someone who had never played before. And not just never played a D&D before, but maybe was not familiar with sort of wargaming or chainmail, which was the wargaming rules that were first came out before D&D came out, and that infamously in the original rules they kind of had several call outs to, hey, or you can use this in chainmail or do that in chainmail. And back in the day, I think probably a large part of their audience were either passingly familiar with chainmail, or if not chainmail, another wargaming type game, and so that made more sense. Obviously, the further you got away from that, when D&D really became its own creature and sort of separated out from chainmail, those references became less relevant and more mysterious. But anyway, by the time you get to BX, these are clearly rules that were created for people to read, beginners, no experience playing earlier versions of the game. You're coming at it from a blank slate. Now, it's sort of impossible for me to look at it and say, these are really easy rules. I mean, I think that they are, but I've been having access to them for, the most of my life. So there may be someone out there who's looking at it totally fresh and who might say these are not clear. But I feel like, and I think the experience has been for people who have come back and read these rules and used them and sort of read over them, that these are very clear rules. And I think one of the things that they do very well is having that split between the expert part of the rules, which is really just later levels. I think the basic book, I think, only goes up to level 3, I think, which we could see over here. Yeah, so you're seeing it's only giving you up to the first 3 levels, right, of the game, and the expert book takes over from there. And so they don't have to focus this whole book on everything that you're going to do in the game, from when you start the game to if you survive to become a high level character. Really, what they're trying to do here is just get you, as a GM, as a DM, as a player, get your foot in the door, get your characters up and running, and here are the rules that are going to get you to do things on both sides of the screen for those first few levels. And really what that comes down to is, you're obviously creating your character, getting your first couple spells, if you have any, equipping, and then moving into the dungeon. So stuff like moving around and doing real, true kind of wilderness hex crawling is not in the basic rules at all. It doesn't come into play into expert. I think the idea being that you're going to be delving into dungeons and dangers, right outside town, or places landmarks that you are easy to get to. You're not worried about trekking for days and days off into some wild expanse until you're maybe at least 4th level, in which case you're flipping over to the expert set, and the expert set then has rules for multi-day travel and all that kind of stuff for hex crawling. So it's not troubled by trying to be the source for your whole game, really. So it lets it be focused on kind of these beginning, what's the word I'm looking for? Concepts and things that you're going to really need to know. Now, these early versions of D&D, they don't have a lot. They're not mechanically complicated. As a player, you really only need to know a few things. I think if we go back to this character sheet, and look at it, let me move it over again. You look at it, you can see kind of off the bat. I mean, here they have people hate THAC0 or using kind of tables, but it ultimately ends up being pretty easy if you lay it out like this. Here's what you have to roll to hit different armor classes. And obviously in these old games, or maybe it's not obvious, the better armor classes are actually the ones with lower numbers. It was always, that point of pride if you had a negative armor class. Like you felt like that's where it was as a fighter or whatever, when you're sitting with a -1 or -2 armor class. So, but really what you're doing is you're rolling a d20, which is, if you're familiar with modern D&D, same thing. And in this case, you're just checking what number you roll lets you hit one armor class. So if you roll a 15, you would tell the dungeon master, hey, I can hit armor class 2. And the dungeon master would turn around and say that's good enough or it's not. And if it is, you would roll damage. If it's not, you curse your luck and then, go back about your business. So over here you have saving throws, which work in a similar manner. You want to beat the number. So if you get something's going to poison you, or this guy anyway, Borg wants to roll above 12. Otherwise, he's poisoned. Now, I guess this brings it sort of a long way around of saying there's just a couple of different mechanics, really as a player or GM, you're going to use to resolve everything that you're going to encounter in the game. And I think that's one of the strengths. Now, it's not a unified mechanic. Not everything is a D20. Some things are a D6. Some things you can use a percentile die or a D100, or you can use D20. It's going to come down to your sort of table style, how your dungeon master likes to run it, or if you're the dungeon DM, how you like to run it. And the idea is that you sort of have a conversation about what makes sense in the moment. Some things are obvious and they're going to be in the rules. If something hits you with poison, you get poisoned, like a poisoned snake or toad, whatever gets you poison, you roll the saving throw for poison. That's easy. But there'll be a lot of things where there may be some gray area, and you can decide how you want to adjudicate it. So you might say for something where you feel like it's related to a saving throw, to use a saving throw. Usually you want to use a saving throw if you're avoiding something. So you might say you're, like a poison, it's kind of out of your hands. It's sort of, do you have that either inherent will to pull through it or some sort of instinctual, you're going to dodge out of the way, then you would pull a saving throw. Maybe if it's sort of a dodge, you might say versus Dragon's Breath. That's sort of, can you get out of the way of this sort of area effect? Boom. If it's something maybe for movement, you might say, okay, that's paralysis. If it's a magic item, you might say, okay, it's going to be magic wand. If it's a spell, you might say it's a spell. And you want to pick the one that works the best. And this will be something that, as a DM, as a player, it comes up, you'll say, hey, I think this is like this, and everyone will say, okay, that seems right, that seems reasonable. and then you'll do it. I think that's really the big takeaway here is you're trying to pick the mechanism that feels the most reasonable for that situation. But maybe you'll get to something and it's not something that's happening to your character. Maybe it's something that they're doing, and so a saving throw doesn't really seem applicable. If it's something where chances may be arbitrary and you don't need to have too much resolution on that chance, that's when you might say it's a D6, right? There are only 6 pips on the dice, so you're looking at about, 15 and a half, more or less, percent per pip. So, it's a fairly broad, but it's, if you move 1 pip, it goes from, 16 or whatever it is to 33 and a third. So if you need more gradations, it doesn't work. But for a lot of stuff, it's kind of good enough, right? If it's really hard to do, you might say, okay, 1 in 6 chance. You got a little less than 10 or more than 10%, less than 20% chance of doing good. You got about a third, 33% chance of doing it. Okay, 2 in 6. If you got a 50% chance, 3 in 6, and then so on up. So it's a very easy scale. You don't have to think about it too much. But not everything maybe fits into that. And once you start to factor in different characters' abilities, it might not be the best fit. Now, you could still work it. You could say, okay, I think this is a 2 in 6 chance, but if you've got +1 or +2 the strength, you can feed it in there. So if you have +2 strength, which would be the very high end of the scale under these rules, then maybe it's 4 in 6 instead of 2 in 6. You can do something like that, but maybe you look at it and you say, that's not quite as elegant. So another thing you can do is you can just roll right up against an attribute. You can say, you know what, this is a strength check, so Borg, roll a d20. If you get underneath your strength, then it was sort of within your powers to do the thing you're trying to do, and it's going to work. If you roll above your strength, then it's not going to work. Which tends to be something that will, for the most part, be in the player's favor, which is not a bad thing, because you're not a normal person per se. Even at first level, you're slightly above normal in your capabilities. And I say that because if you're rolling 3d6 down the line, you're going to end up with something like 10.5 as your average score, right? 3.5 plus 3.5 plus 3.5. So 10.5. So you have if you're doing d20, I guess it's about even, right? 10.5, 10.5. But I kind of feel like the edge is that you're going to have at least some that are above 10. Though if you're unlucky, not, and then you have at least about an average chance of getting wherever it is. So if everything works out the same, you're going to have about a 50-50 chance, which is pretty good odds. And if you know that, and you sort of, as a unit, have the people who are smart doing stuff that's going to be smart, the people who are strong doing stuff that's going to be strong, you can work those advantages in a way that I think is totally within the scope of the rules and sort of what you're supposed to be doing, right? The sneaky people should be doing sneaky things, the strong people should be doing strong things, and the smart people should be doing smart people things. So you can kind of work that in your favor. And then the third one being the percentile or percentage dice. If none of those seem to work, and I know they actually give an example somewhere in here where basically the idea is that you should always have a chance, but some things, and I don't know exactly where it is. It's probably anyway, I could find it later on. But the idea is that you should have a chance. And so maybe if you're rolling in strength and they're high strength, odds are they're going to make these rolls you're giving them, right? Borg has 17 strength. Chances are if you throw something at them and you say, hey, it's just a straight strength check, Borg's going to do it. If you just keep extending that, it's going to get sort of silly. Pick up a boulder. Okay, I've got 17 strength. Roll under 17 is always going to get it. And yeah, you could play with modifiers. You can do a lot of that stuff. But sometimes it's easier just mentally to say, I think you got a 5% chance of doing that. Or I think you got a 4% chance, or any particular number, and that's when you can really use the percentiles. Yes, if it's a straight 5%, you could do on a d20 and just say 20 hits and you go. But having the percentile dice gives you kind of full resolution, 1 to 100, or whatever odds you want to give it. If it's 1% at the low end and something crazy 99% on the other end, you say to Borg, I know you're trying to jump across this 20-foot chasm. I think that's a really low chance. I'm going to say 5%. Then Borg could say, well, what if I tie this grappling hook to my hand, and so it gives me a little extra reach, and I can reach out and grab it. And you say, okay, make it 14%. And Borg says, well, I've got an army of zombies creeping this way that I can't fight off, so that's good enough for me. I'll try to roll and jump. And that's kind of what you're trying to do. You're trying to get to a point with these rulings where you not necessarily have to like the odds as a player. Look, some things don't have great odds. That's a 20-foot chasm. Yeah, chances are someone's not jumping across, but you got a chance. And it seems reasonable to you. And then you've agreed that it's reasonable, and then you make the roll, and if you miss or if it succeeds, then you just go forward. But really, those are the only few rolls that you have. There's not a ton of different mechanics. It's just either that kind of D20, a D6, or percentile. And that's it. And the art of it from a dungeon mastering perspective is just deciding which one of those mechanics you're going to use at which time. What is most appropriate and what makes the most sense and what kind of gets you the sort of range of results that you want. Because like I said, some rolls for certain things are maybe not going to give you the kind of results that you want. Maybe they're going to be skewed one way or another. They're either too easy to hit or they're too difficult. And so they give you these tools. Use one of these. And I think it's fairly elegant. I mean, I think some people would look at and say if you had a unified mechanic, everything D100, everything D20, or everything D6, that would be, superior. So you only have to remember that one thing, and you can go from there. But I tend to think it doesn't always work quite that easily. I think even in modern, 5th edition, where everything's D, has a difficulty rating and you're rolling a D20, there's still a lot of give and take over what should be what difficulty rating and how does that work. And I think from a flavor perspective, there is something to rolling some different dice and giving a different feel to it. Rolling one thing versus another. If you're at the point where you're rolling a percentage dice, and maybe it's probably because it's a low percentage, that has a different kind of feel to it. It almost feels more epic if you have to roll and you have to roll within 8 or some weird odd number that you guys all came to for some task. That has kind of a different feel to it than, rolling a D6. And not that you can't get there with rolling a D20, because obviously if you're sitting there with a dice and you have to roll a 20 to get this hit that you need to get the success, yeah, that is a special thing too. But I kind of like having these different little systems. And like I said, they're not difficult, to keep up with. And as a player, you really don't have to know any of them at all, because you're not going to be thinking in terms of mechanics, right? You're going to be thinking in the fiction, and it's the dungeon master who's going to come back and translate that fiction into the mechanic that you need to find a result. And that's the other thing. If we go back to Borg's character sheet, there's no skills, no feats. As a fighter, there's not even any powers. You are just a guy who's better than normal guys at hitting things. You're not even really better as a fighter at not getting hit with things. Your advantage as a fighter is just that you have all the options armor-wise to become better at not being hit. But by default, if you're sitting there wearing plain clothes, you are no better at dodging than somebody else wearing plain clothes. But you're good at hitting stuff. And so everything you're going to do in the game, the only thing that you have that's set here is that hitting stuff. So, this is tied to your character sheet, and damage will be tied to, basically your weapon and, your strength. Everything else you're going to be doing is going to be with this sort of interaction between the fiction and then determining what mechanic fits for that fiction. So, for example, you're in a room, maybe it was a dining hall, and there are these long, heavy oaken tables, and then the door on the far end bursts open and goblins come screaming in. And so, the DM looks at you and says, initiative, what do you do? And so maybe you say, okay, I want to get one of these to knock over one of these tables to use as cover. right? So then that's not on your character sheet. There's no knock things over for cover. There's not even really a feats of strength or, you know, do this amazing thing. At that point, then it becomes between you and the DM to say, how do you want to do that, right? So the DM may say, just straight up strength check, like I mentioned before. Just do a strength check. And for Borg, that's great. He's really good at strength checks. But maybe the GM says, you know, that table's really heavy and really long. It's going to take a couple of you to just turn that thing over. You know, maybe it's only a 10% chance right now. Or, you know, if you can get one of your other companions or two others to help you, that will bump your chances up until it's kind of automatic. How do you want to do it? And then maybe Borg changes his mind and says, well, if it's that heavy, I don't want to waste my turn, and then they don't help me, and so it doesn't happen. Or Borg says, I'm going to put my shoulder into it. I'm going to call out to my comrades, to me, help me with the table. And then hopefully they do. And if 2 or 3 of them do, then the table will get turned over. If not, we'll make a roll, or I'll make a roll and they'll make a roll, and we'll see how we go from there. And the GM will say, perfect. You know, if 3 of you can do it, that's automatic. If 2 of you do it, you both need to make strength checks, and I'm going to make it a little bit more difficult. You know, say I'm going to add 2 or 4 to your rolls, or subtract 2 or 4 from your strength, and then make the roll. And then you do it. So from the player's standpoint, you don't really have to look at your sheet much, if at all, only to make these references. If I'm Borg, if I have a sense of my character, I know he's strong, I don't have to constantly reference my sheet to check his strength or to check some other measure. I just have to talk about what I think he's going to do, and then the DM's going to tell me how that translates mechanically to these numbers and these things on my sheet. For a magic user or cleric, it's a little bit different because they have spells, and spells have descriptions, and so you may need to look at the spell descriptions. But again, the same thing. Once you've kind of gone through and you've sort of established things about your character through creation and you have your spells, you may need to reference the spell, but that's it. And obviously you'll have to reference hit points if you get hit by an attack, and you may have to reference your saving throws. But your DM is going to tell you about those. Your DM will tell you when you need to roll against a saving throw. The DM will be able to help you at least. You know, you can work together on what to do for a particular spell, if there's anything unusual, if it uses a save against an opponent, or if it just goes against hit points, or whatever the spell does. You can kind of address that as they come. But moment to moment, you don't need to check this stuff very much. There's not a lot of things you can do, which I think is a benefit. I think that everyone with these systems always kind of yearns for something they don't have. And I think a lot of people with these systems wanted, at a certain point, more specialization, right? Because as a fighter, you're good with any weapon you throw at them. They can wield anything, which also means that they're not, as fighters go, they're not better with one weapon than they are with another. And you're always looking for that advantage. And so you start to look at, well, what if I don't care about spears? I'd rather not be great at spears so I can be even better with swords. And so I think what you saw and you see in the rules cyclopedia and excuse me, and things like an AD&D and then other things going forward is this specialization, and with that becomes skills. You know, I want to be better at this, or I want to have a leg up at that. The problem, and I think I see this in 5th edition and other games, is that there's a price to that specialization, which is that your focus becomes narrower and narrower. If I'm a fighter, if I'm Borg, I could lose all my weapons, thrown in a dungeon, I get out and there's a club. There's a club, there's whatever. I was using swords before, but now I rummage through some trash, I find an old mace. I am as good with that mace as I am with my sword that I've had since I was a kid, which means I can just get up and go, right? I don't need to suddenly be like, oh, geez, I don't have a sword. But now, in a later edition, maybe I took a feat that said I'm a swordsman, and I took another feat that said I'm this or I'm that, and now I need to have a sword. And the moment I don't have a sword, suddenly I'm screwed. Suddenly, I can't use a mace. I have no bonus to hit with a mace. I threw everything into being a swordsman, so now without a sword, I am useless. And you don't have that problem. You don't have to worry about it. You're a fighter, you're good. If you want to use swords, use swords. If you want to use maces, use maces. But push comes to shove, you're as good with a mace as you are with a sword, and we're not going to worry about it. It's an abstraction because obviously in real life, someone probably needs to be a swordsman, right? A real medieval warrior probably made a choice early on, or they didn't have a choice. It's just what weapons their culture used or their community used. That's what you learn. But in the game, it just makes sense to have that versatility, to not worry about use axes versus swords or whatever. You pick up weapons and you go. So I think that's a strength of these systems. And I think by leaving skills and they existed. The original white box D&D didn't have skills, but certainly games that came after it that were prior to this excuse me edition, they had skills. Traveler, 1977, I guess, has tons of skills and things like that. So it's not like those systems didn't exist. I think the thing is to think about here with this game is what does the detail, what is that extra detail and extra resolution, what are those that extra crunch give you, and what's the price for that crunch? And I think when you play these games, I think you can see how not having the crunch doesn't really affect the bottom line too much, because you know what, if you want to call yourself Borg the Swordsman and make it your purpose just to wield swords, you can. You're not penalized for it at all. Now, you're not given any special bonus for deciding to do that, but you're not penalized. And if you want to role play that you refuse to use non-edged weapons as Borg the Swordsman, you're welcome to it. They just don't give you any kind of mechanical, they don't lock you into it mechanically. And I think that's actually a good thing. Because, as I said before, when you specialize, your focus narrows and you lose that kind of versatility. And it's not just a role-playing issue, because what I see in places like Reddit and things like that is players do not seem to want to lose their specialty, which makes sense. If you've invested in having these specializations, you don't want to lose them. And so that puts, as a dungeon master, that can put you in an awkward position of, fictionally, it makes sense if they take Borg's sword. For whatever reason, he was captured, it's whatever happens. It makes total sense in terms of what's happening in the story, in the game world, in this fictional world, for Borg to lose his sword. But I know that this player has spent so much putting everything into Borg's sword that if I take away his sword, it's making his character nigh unplayable. And now, how you respond to that is obviously going to be very personal. Some GMs are going to say, well, tough cookies, I didn't ask him to do that, so goodbye sword. Other GMs are going to be more, I want to make sure my player has fun, and I know that if Borg doesn't have a sword, he's not going to have fun, or she. So I'm not going to take away the sword. I'll figure out another way to get where I wanted to go. And I'm not trying to advocate over one or the other, but going back to these basic rules, you don't have to do it. You don't have to worry about it. The only character that has any skills at all is the thief. And I will find the thief skills. Is that it right there? Yep, thief abilities. Let's go slide this. There we go. That's it. And they use a percentage for these. It's one of those funny things. They kind of, here they only go up to 30%, right? And this is sort of an interesting thing, and it's kind of one of the translation challenges, and this is not a new phenomenon. But when you talk to people who played the game, and I was a kid when I played these, maybe becoming a teen, so I wasn't someone who was playing it from a sense of really having a good grip of the rules and kind of how things maybe should be. But yeah, the idea behind thief skills was they were really supposed to be supernatural. If you were a thief, you could hide in shadows. It was not the same as hiding in a dark place or hiding behind a door. As someone would put it, anybody can hide behind a door. A thief can hide in shadows. That was supposed to be almost a supernatural kind of ability. It doesn't necessarily shine through in all these rules. Just the way they wrote them and the way people played them tended to make it more mundane than that, which kind of put thieves in a bad spot, because you only have a few things that you're good at, and it hurts if you're not good at those things, right? But that said, they try to make it kind of evocative in a sense, and I think that's what hide and shadows. It's supposed to be more evocative. This is special, much like climb sheer surfaces. The idea is you're not supposed to roll this every time you climb a wall. If you're looking at a wall and anybody could climb it, the thief's supposed to scramble up the wall without problem. Where the thief is supposed to roll is if you're looking at a wall that you would tell another character, you can't climb this. There are no handholds. It looks like it's just glass or something similar, right? The thief comes up to it, cracks his knuckles and say, let me give this a shot. And that's when you roll on it. Like, these are supposed to be kind of more than just what others could do. I don't know if that they managed to bring it out in the descriptions. But the names are supposed to be kind of, evocative. But in any case, those are the only skills that you have. And these are not things necessarily that other people can't do. And this is always been one of the things with thieves, is this concept of that they're sort of supernatural versus mundane. This is not to say that no one else can try to hide, no one else can try to climb something, no one else can try to pick pockets, but really anyone else doing it is kind of clumsy and is probably apt to fail. The idea here would be that if a thief, it's a normal wall, you would maybe have somebody else roll. If it's a normal wall, thief doesn't have to roll. If it's a sheer wall, then maybe you tell someone they got a 1 in 100 shot or whatever it is. A thief, has got a much better chance. If somebody else maybe has a 1 in 6 chance of not being seen, the thief's got a better chance, of that. And that sort of thing. It's, again, supposed to be above and beyond what normal people can do, not that normal people can't or other classes can't do that. They're just not doing as well, and they just can't do it under more supernatural circumstances, right? And dungeons, particularly the way they were originally conceived, were sort of supernatural places. The underworld wasn't just a place that's underground. It had different rules and different ways that it worked, and so it makes sense that a class that's kind of built for these sort of things would have, again, their own kind of supernatural abilities. But besides my just blathering on and on, there's not a lot to it. If you're a player, you really 18 pages. B18 is pretty much the last page of player-facing material. So you got 18 pages, and you take away equipment lists and spells and everything. It's a very slim rule book. And then the rest of the book is all about monsters and creating encounters and treasure. And I guess that's maybe the last thing, and perhaps the biggest thing to talk about with regards to these rules is how sort of advancement and treasure and all those things worked. In these rules, in the old game, experience was gained through acquisition of treasure. 1 experience point for 1 gold piece of non-magical treasure acquired. The non-magical bit's a little bit important. It's not super important, but the idea was that if it's magical, it has sort of benefits unto itself. And so it was worth something to you as a thing and not as a commodity. So that if you have a +1 sword and that's useful to you, you don't get to double dip and have it be a source of experience and a source of actual practical usefulness. It was kind of one or the other. But you get 1 XP for each gold piece that you would find, or gold piece equivalent, because you could find gems, jewelry, all kinds of items. Bottom line is it's monetary value. You convert that on a gold piece basis to experience, and that's what you earn. That's how you advance. So that's at core what the game is about. It's about acquiring loot and then, getting it, surviving enough to bring it back alive. You can get experience by killing monsters. It's very paltry amounts. You are much, much more encouraged to get loot than to kill monsters. 1, killing monsters is dangerous. These games, particularly these old versions, they're all built around scarcity of resources, spells, health, food, money, equipment. all very scarce. You don't start off with a ton of money. Maybe you get lucky. Even if you are lucky, you're gonna have a very finite amount of resources to deal with. Healing is extremely slow. There's no surges. There's no this or that. You're gonna heal maybe a hit point a day. I think I could look it up exactly, but and that's, I think, if you're resting all day. It is slow. All right, let me see. It is very slow. So the idea is that you do not want to just flippantly go and start fighting things, because when you do that, you're going to get hurt. You very well may die, and you don't get much for it as far as advancement goes. It's a dicey business. You're going to have 1, 2, 3, 4 hit points. Maybe you're lucky. Like, I think Borg, they have a 6. I mean, that's a good roll, 6 hit points. But even then, that's 1 or 2 hits, and you're out. So there's sort of an engine at work. Systems that are all kind of locked in like gears. And, each one, all these gears are kind of interlocked. So you're turning one and it's turning another one at a different rate. It's kind of all spinning to create this effect. And now combat is a big part of that mechanical gears because it's so deadly. Because particularly at low levels, you're going to be fighting things that can kill you with 1 shot. Maybe 2 shots if you're lucky. 3 shots if you're really lucky. You're going to want to plan out. You're going to want to try everything you could possibly do to have every advantage if you go into combat. Or you want to avoid combat altogether. Because you not only have to go in and get the money, or get the loot, hopefully you find the loot, you have to get it back out again. It doesn't do you any good to get the loot and then die going back out, right? Because it's a 2-way trip. So, you're going into a dungeon, you're going to be facing some things that are there. You have random encounters, so you're going to face some things that you're not going to know about. The GM's not even going to know about potentially until they happen. You're going to have to find loot. You're going to have to turn around. You're going to have to get out of there with your loot. Keep in mind, clerics don't get spells until 2nd level. So your 1st level party has no healing potential at all. If they're lucky and they got a potion, maybe they have one. But odds are they don't. Your magic user, again, depending on how your dungeon master does spells, some people do randomly, some people do choice, some people maybe do some kind of combination of the two. If you've got sleep, that's a great one-time encounter buster because potentially it could just knock out a whole group of opponents. That's great. If you have charm, you can maybe get a monster on your team as your thrall, and charm can last for months. In new editions, they make it only like 15 minutes, 20 minutes, something like that. I mean, back in these editions, charm, a creature with low enough intelligence, you can have them dominated for months at a time. You can really have a long-term companion through charm. But again, you're a magic user at 1st level, you get 1 shot. And if you took charm, if you took sleep, those are great spells for combat. But of course, they're useless outside combat. No read magic, no detect magic. Those are also good spells to have, particularly if you're trying to suss out treasure, find out what may be worth a lot versus what's worth a little. Because you also run into things like encumbrance. How much can you carry? How many torches do you have? That determines how far you can go. You have a certain amount of torches. You can spend a certain amount of time fooling around before you have to turn around and get out. Otherwise, it goes dark, and then who knows what kind of crazy stuff can happen in the dark when you can't see anything trying to get out of a dungeon. You have food, and you have to eat that food. If you go into dungeons and you don't find treasure and you have to go back to town, you either have to buy food and eat in town, or you can eat rations that you have. But you're spending money in town. You're spending money on your lodgings. And if you're not spending the night in town, which is we sort of reserved as a mostly or usually safe space, then you have to deal again with random encounters. And random encounters really can be a killer, and kind of intentionally so. The idea is that you're in a dangerous place, a place that really is hostile to you. And it's almost working against you. That's kind of has that more that supernatural feeling. Right? You're in the underworld or you're in the wilderness, and it's not a neutral place. Not necessarily everything's going to fight you, because that's another thing, is that they give you languages for different monsters. They give morals for, as you'll see here, rules for morale. Morale, and somewhere along here is reactions that allow you to get away without fighting everything. Even potentially make allies. There, you can make certain morale rolls or reaction rolls, and it will actually get the monsters on your side or make them very... here we go. Oh, this was for retainers. I think there's one for monsters too. They can be very helpful. Let's see if it's... I'm not sure where it is. It's somewhere here. They can be very helpful. The problem is that you can't count on it, right? So you're trying your best to play the odds. It's all about that risk reward. You are definitely going to have to fight things. If you're very lucky, maybe you can sneak around stuff, but most likely there's going to be somewhere you want to get to, some guys who are standing in your way, and you can take the chance, because again, everything's a chance. I have a position right now where I'm in a dark part of a space, or I'm far enough away and I could see, and there's some goblins. They're in front of a door. They're lost in thought. They're talking to each other. They don't see me. I have a couple of things I can do. I can just turn around and walk away. Find some other rooms that don't have goblins standing in front of them. I can step out of my hiding spot. I speak goblin, or Borg speaks goblin, so I'm going to talk to them, and I'm going to see what they're going to say. But there's a chance that they're not going to be friendly. Maybe these particular goblins just won't be friendly regardless. Not everything has to be amenable to being chatted up. Some things are just, if you're invading somebody else's fortress and these are the guardians of that fortress, they're probably not going to reason with you too much unless you're just hands up and surrendering. So I can take that chance. Or I can try, I have surprise, I have a bow, maybe I can get a shot off, take out the first goblin. There's 3 goblins. Hopefully they don't have missile weapons, and they're going to have to close to my position, so I'm going to take my shot. The fighters are going to form up in front. They're going to put their shields out. They're going to go defensively. And maybe I can get 2 shots in, and then it'll just be 1 goblin against the 2 beefy fighters in front of me, and we'll win. And those are the kind of decisions you have to make. You have to kind of weigh how that works, because every time you take a hit, you're not getting that health back right away. You can't just take a short rest and say, bam, I'm up back up to full. Let's go to the next room. Like, every hit's going to count, because maybe you're at 6 hit points like Borg. Maybe you get lucky. You only get hit for 2 hit points, but now you're down to 4. Or you're down to 3, and you start to think about it, and now the next hit, the odds are really starting to be against you if you get hit again. You're down to 3 or 2 hit points, and look, some characters are going to start with 1 hit point or 2 hit points. You can't afford to take a hit. So it's not about, hey, we're going to fight everything. It's about, we got to try to get this treasure out of here. We may need to fight things. If we are going to fight them, we definitely want to fight them on our terms. And again, this is why random encounters can be brutal, because if you get surprised, and random encounters, the distance can be variable. You can get surprised. They can be right on top of you for whatever reason. Not only are they there, they get to decide what to do first. And they get to do it before you get to respond. If you're down to 1 or 2 hit points, and those monsters are hostile, and they go first, it could be lights out. And, there's no death saves. You're down to 0. That's it. You're donezo. So, it's important. And I feel like in a little bit it goes back to kind of the, D&D rose out of war games, and there's that kind of war game sort of element where, war games, you're fighting battles, but it's all about the positioning, right? You were trying to position your forces so they have the best chance of success, and your opponent has the worst chance of success. You're trying to force these situations where you're flanking your opponent, and so you can put the crunch on him and do more damage to him than he is capable of doing to you, or at least has a you have a much better chance of doing damage if you're going to fight. And I think from a a general perspective, if you could, sometimes you can, they have that saying, the battles are won before they're fought because of all that positioning. And if you can position yourself in such a way, you can kind of guarantee yourself, outside of random chance and divine providence sort of thing, you can guarantee yourself victory. And it's the same in this game. You want to only fight the battles you think you can win on the terms when you can win. The times that you get forced into battles, or you let the battle determine how you fight it, are when you're apt to lose them. And when you lose them in this game, very often you're going to die, particularly at low levels, because you just have no buffer. Even if an NPC would maybe do something with you, you are one, maybe you have a goblin commander, and he's got his goblin archers, and maybe the goblin commander would consider taking you prisoner. You could die to arrows before the DM can even think about, oh, well, he would take them prisoner. Oh, it's too late. They're dead, because they only had 1 hit point, and an arrow is going to do 6, averages about 3 hit points and damage. So I think that with later editions, if you're coming from 5th edition, if you're coming from another edition that really reveled in sort of the combat for the joy of combat, that's not what you're going to find here. What you're going to find here is that the combat is a tool, one of many tools that you have at your disposal, one that you can certainly use, but you want to finagle, finesse, get it so that you're using it to your most advantageous way possible. You're putting yourself in the best position, and you're using it when you have the best position. So you're putting yourself in the best spot not to lose and to win. And so if you can get surprise, you want to take it. If you get numbers, you want to take it. If you can use sleep or charm or fireball and just blow them up before they can even respond to you, you want to take it. Do you want to get surprised? Hell no. Do you want to risk tons of random encounters? No, you don't. And again, that feeds into the rest of the mechanics, right? Because random encounters happen with time, so you don't want to waste time. So every time you open a door, every time you stop to search for secret doors, there's a clock that's ticking, and one of those ticks is going to come up random encounter, and then all bets are off what you're going to get. So there's this economy of how much time do I spend. I can't just fiddle around this dungeon forever, because the more encounters there are, the more chances are going to be hostile, the more chances I'm going to get hit, the more chances I'm going to die. So you have to make choices, fast choices, and keep on moving on. By the same token, maybe I don't think there's going to be a lot of encounters, but now I'm limited on torches, or I'm limited on food, or I have to get back before nightfall. A lot of different of these gears are there to keep everything moving along, kind of keep the pressure, keep the tension on as far as what you're doing. Maybe you take one away, it might put some strain on the other ones, but the way they all kind of work together, it's very simple. There's not a lot of rules, not a lot of complexity. It's not complicated, but it works together in a very seamless way to kind of present this challenge, which is to go inside a dangerous place or dangerous location, get all the loot you can carry, and get back out again alive. And that's really all the game is. And I hope that through this probably too long sort of overview of it, I've been able to show sort of how sort of simple it can be, how even the rules they have, once you grok it, it's something that is very easy to keep track of. And again, as a player, you really don't have to keep track of much of it. It's more going to be up to your dungeon master to keep track of. But that it makes for a very light but sort of fulfilling experience that I think really captures the sort of danger and tension of being someone who maybe has the potential to be a hero, right? But you're starting out, you're barely better than normal. Going somewhere that's really scary and dangerous, and by the edge of your wits and the steel of your blade, come back a wealthy person and turn that wealth into more power and prestige and ability, and then taking on larger and larger challenges until hopefully if you survive long enough, you get to retire, a lord or lady, or some kind of a person of legend. I hope this worked for you. If it did, let me know. If it didn't, let me know, and hopefully there'll be more of these videos. Talk to you later.